And so the reason why I talk about mental health almost like a diet or taking care of one's physical health is the basics just don't go away. And I think that sometimes people are looking around like, well, maybe I can just get less sleep. It's like, no, you can't. You're not as, and I always go back to, you're not as effective or efficient. That there's some studies from Harvard Business Review that if you are not taking adequate breaks, like after 90 minutes, what happens is they find that those people who don't do that, they take 25% longer to do the very same task. And so what happens is by not taking care of our bodies, we may be effective, but we're less efficient. And that's what we all want. We want to be able to do things more efficiently and take less energy. So I talk about meditation, that when they give people a novel task and they give a meditator and a non-meditator, the meditators use less of their brain.
Welcome to the Moxie podcast. We are in the month of March, and all throughout this month, we have been talking about what it takes to shift our mindset, but what it really means to take care of ourselves as well. As you guys know, that is many themes that we have on Moxie throughout the last 5 years is just talking about entrepreneurship and kind of the grit of it, but also really the nature of our journey and what it looks like. And so the heartbeat of Moxie has always been to capture courageous stories by ordinary people, because everyone, we are so similar, no matter where we are in the world. And so I am so excited to have Chantel here on the podcast. And so welcome to our community.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for having me. I really appreciate being here, but I'm also really excited.
I'm so thrilled that you're here and to just share your journey, but also I know our listeners are going to be able to learn so much from you. And so I just want to start there. One of my first questions I always ask, and you can answer this in any way, but what would you say you are best known for?
It's really interesting. It is two things, but I would say I'm best known for being a therapist who does therapy with a business coaching lens. So I am a therapist and I'm a certified business coach.
I love that. I feel so I started teaching in the social work department at higher ed. So I teach in the graduate program. And what's so interesting about it is I never was surrounded by so many licensed therapists in my life before, because I never really considered myself a social worker. But even though we do a lot of what I do is a lot of international work, but I have so much just respect for the work that you do and that you've stepped into and kind of the dedication of that. But I do love that you have that other perspective, because I feel everyone kind of has, their niche that they step into, but entrepreneurs, I feel sometimes we're on our little isolated path and don't necessarily have the right support there and what is needed. So how did you so what came first? Did the business lens come first, or did stepping into being a licensed therapist come first?
Well, I'm an LCSW, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and that came first. And when I started on my entrepreneurial journey was really when I went into private practice, and the folks that I kept getting were mostly corporate people. And then it started to be a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I say a lot, I'm saying probably 2/3 corporate, 1/3 entrepreneurs. However, I was on the same journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was reading a lot and getting coaching myself. And I started to realize that these are my people. And it and it's ironic because back in 2011, even before I actually embarked on my 4 years before I embarked on my sort of entrepreneurial journey, I became a certified business coach because of these kind of hard driving clients that I was getting. And you kind of attract what you are.
Yeah.
You kind of have to heal yourself. And the more and more I delve into entrepreneurship and understanding that there's not a whole ton of research on entrepreneurship. But what we do know is that during an entrepreneur's tenure, about 70% will have some sort of mental health challenge or crisis. So
Mhm.
it's very, very high. It's much higher than sort of ordinary folks. But if you start to think about what it takes, the grit, the determination, the knowing, the inner knowing that I've got something to give, to impart on the world, and this is really important. That single-mindedness is a part of that, but that's the very thing that becomes your kryptonite in the end.
Mhm.
And so learning how to manage that. And so it was with my clients and then going through the process myself that I wound up here. And it's been absolutely fantastic. We've been able to, we work with Google for Startups
Oh, I love
program,
that
and
program.
it's so awesome. My team and I, since 2020, have done about 2,500 sessions with just Google alone. We also work with
Wow.
Lenovo's Evolve Small program. I don't know if you're familiar with Village Capital out of New
Mhm.
York. They do a lot of
Yeah.
justice tech. We work with them as well. We've been just so fortunate to be able to work with entrepreneurs, and we're a little different from other therapists because we understand the journey, we understand the business terms. And so whereas somebody who isn't, and again, I don't want to, typically a regular therapist might think that there's some grandiosity there,
Yeah.
that that there's some narcissism there in the single-minded pursuit and so forth. And really, so you have to understand the space in order to help an entrepreneur sort of manage their sense of self and not have it get tied up with the business, but also to help them manage their relationships, which are extremely important. Higher
Mm.
divorce rates also, by the way, with
Wow.
entrepreneurship. Yeah. And then helping them manage that part of their business so that what we like to do is connect a leader's psychology to their leadership style, how they manage their teams, how they delegate. So we're looking at those three important areas: relationships, themselves, and how they're managing their business, so that we can soup to nuts make a big impact on that entrepreneur's life. So it's I could talk for hours and you
Well,
would
that's
say,
what we're
I'm
here to
tired of
do.
hearing about entrepreneurs.
No, I'm like every time, especially I can feel within the first 5 minutes like my guest's energy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, we could talk for hours, and we have so little time, but that's okay. No, I love it. First of all, I think one of the greatest things that I ever did as an entrepreneur is finally get like a coach in my life. But I think you are right in that, like the coach that I specifically like, it would be really interesting to have not just a business coach, but to have someone that knows all the other sides of, yeah, being a licensed social worker and like understanding the person. Because even teaching, um, in that field now, like it's such a different level of understanding of what that individual is going. It's like both and. So I think that's such a unique, that's very superpower of you. You have two really great, great
Thank you.
blends here. And I love that you have a team that you've built that's kind of around all of these different initiatives. Do you, so you shared a couple of programs that you work with, but you also still work with individuals as well.
Absolutely. So we have a B2B and a B2C
Okay.
portion of the business. And so it's just again, it's super exciting. We do a lot with women in the city of Atlanta. We work with the Women's Entrepreneurial Initiative, and so it's just it is. We're my team. We're having a lot of fun, and we feel that what we're doing is a big contribution, given that 47 to 48% of the economy in the U.S. is small business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about common themes that you see because I think it's important for us, especially our listeners, to know they are not alone. And so when you have someone kind of onboarded or that you're walking with, what are some of the, I mean, you shared like 3 different parts that you are working with, like individual, I think you said,
Like
relationships
their
and
sense of self. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I would love to hopefully not everybody gets to you and they're just like completely broken. Hopefully they're a little proactive when they get to you. But I would love to hear some of that, some of those common themes that see, that you experience with your clients.
Um, there's 2 or 3 that, or maybe even 4. One common theme is around a lack of a sense of self, that my entrepreneurs believe that they are their business. And I don't mean in a narcissistic way at all.
Mhm.
Their sense of self is riding on whether the business does well or not. And
Mhm.
so if the business does well, they feel good about themselves. The business is struggling, they're really down in the dumps. We see a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, more anxiety than we do depression.
Mhm.
Um, Lots of folks also riding shotgun is imposter syndrome. I see that more with women than I do men. It really is interesting, this sense of, I'll have women who have all the right stuff. And what I mean by that is they've got the knowledge base, they're well credentialed, and they are a voice within that space. And so, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm wondering, like, maybe I really don't have what it takes. And maybe all these other people are not seeing it correctly." And so, dealing with a lot of that, and with that it can sometimes come pretty crippling anxiety.
Mhm.
Um, and the other thing that I see are a lot of broken relationships, relationships that need to be healed, that are showing up. Like I always use Walter Isaacson's book on Elon Musk, and
Mm.
the themes that are there are pretty they're interesting ones, and that's why I have a coach, by the way. So
Every coach
am
needs a coach, so that's a great
I am
example.
so guided by coaching principles, and yet the base and the foundation of my training is as a social worker. And when I tell people, like, some people ask me, "Hey, do you know about the court system?" No, all I've ever done is clinical social work, so I only know about therapy.
Yeah.
And so my whole foundation is on therapy, and I believe that that's where coaching can not miss it. It's just that they're not qualified to be in that space. And
Mhm.
so when you read Walter Isaacson's book on Elon, you start to see why he shows up the way he does in his companies,
Mm.
who, how he manages his team with sort of an iron fist, that there's a lot of volatility in the way that he's leading,
Mhm.
and that people sometimes feel like they're a tool, like they're a means to an end from.
Yeah.
And I've like mad a lot of respect for Elon.
Yeah.
He's just like the rest of us, is that you don't have a switch that says, "Oh, now I'm in professional mode and I leave all of my stuff that happened to me behind." I was just working with somebody who's a physician today, and we were talking about her perfectionistic mom
Mm.
and how that has impacted her self-esteem, the way she shows up in
Mhm.
life. And so that's where that's really our superpower, is being able to combine the two and not miss that,
Mhm.
because that informs a lot of how we show up as leaders. And to think that, hey, if I just stay in the present and I just give you the tools,
Mhm.
it's again, I have a coach. I do not have a therapist at this time. So I want everybody to know, like, I love, 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 love coaching. I've had more coaches than I have therapists. So just
Yeah.
to give you that clue, but I also know that coaches miss that part because they're not trained, and it's not their expertise either.
Yeah.
So that's where I guess, where we shine in that area. And so I see those different areas, and also, believe it or not, traumatic experiences, and that will show up around trusting your team, believing that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, and not micromanaging them. Um, can really show up if there's a lot of issues around abandonment or distrust. It'll show up in your leadership style.
Yeah.
Just all the good stuff shows up too. All the wonderful things that we've learned along the way show up, and they get those goodies, but sometimes they get those little not so like lumps of coal, as I call them, like in Santa's
Yeah.
bag. He's got all those presents, but he's got a few lumps of coal.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. Because your culture of my background is leadership education. So I like will just geek out on leadership all the time, and just like the culture that you really hold in your organization or company does start with you. But I find that I love that you're separating the two, because I do find the struggle with entrepreneurs, myself included, in the journey I've been in, is separating that identity factor of and I do completely believe you in the anxiety, because I'm like, man, yeah, anxiety is way more tied to I feel like every little trickle of impact within relationships. I've been married 10 years. And I'm like, I'm so grateful for my partner. I feel like if I had anybody else, it would have probably led to a very bad statistic. Like, because like you just also having that person who is like a bit understanding. But it's such a journey. And I think to find your sense of self, to get through that and to work through that. And I would love to hear from you some like when someone's in it, and they maybe they can't separate the sense of self and all the things going on, and they're having like that high anxiety, like some practical tools or advice that you give them to help kind of start to make shifts out of that mindset.
Well, it, it's like anything else. It's sort of, when we're talking about it, it's pretty big and it's
Yeah.
different for everyone. Oftentimes, what I find is it tends to be negative messages, negative messaging, and so we're always looking for ways to reframe. Remember,
Hmm.
we talked about that just before,
Yeah.
reframing, and also looking at ways of quieting the mind. And so I always say that mental health is kind of like traditional health. Those things about getting enough sleep, making sure that you're connecting with people outside of your business, that pouring into oneself, however that may be, through being out in nature. I'm a huge fan of that. Being out in nature, but also making sure that the body is working, getting enough exercise. That if we don't do those things, if we're not connecting, if we're not trying to manage our thoughts, like with a coach or a therapist, or if we're not taking care of our bodies, those things just don't change. And I think, if I can say, like, the toughest thing is, oftentimes people are looking for like something different. And for us, cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of the real deal, but also we look at EMDR for
Mhm.
folks who are dealing with trauma. We also, I just happen to have this next to, because I'm always referring to I'm sure you're familiar with this book,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I've literally, it is so marked up and so dark. Always, I've read this twice, but I've been a meditator now for a decade, and I could not do what I do without meditation. And so the reason why I talk about mental health almost like a diet or taking care of one's physical health is the basics just don't go away. And I
Mhm.
think that sometimes people are looking around like, well, maybe I can just get less sleep. It's like, no, you can't. You're not as, and I always go back to, you're not as effective or efficient. That there's some studies from Harvard Business Review that if you are not taking adequate breaks, like after 90 minutes, what happens is they find that those people who don't do that, they take 25% longer to do the very same task. And so what happens is by not taking care of our bodies, we may be effective, but we're less efficient. And that's
Mhm.
what we all want. We want to be able to do things more efficiently and take less energy. So I talk about meditation, that when they give people a novel task and they give a meditator and a non-meditator, the meditators use less of their brain. It sounds weird, like they're not as smart, but really it just means energetically, because this is an organ, right?
Yeah.
And we're trying to make sure that we're not overloading it.
Yeah.
And so meditators, they have to use less of their brain in order to get those novel tasks done. And so I'm I'm still saying what every doctor says is eat your vegetables, get enough sleep. That just doesn't go away. And I think that sometimes people, entrepreneurs, are trying to find their way around that. And if they would embrace that foundation, that's half the battle, half of it.
Yeah. I think we're always potentially looking for the shortcut, the easy fix. And I think about how many times that, like, man, I'm curious if you know a statistic, but I feel like it's like fighting. As an entrepreneur, we're fighting that the journey to not get to burnout, right? And so in order to not get there, which is a high stat that we all land there some point in our journey. I have very core memories of that, of not wanting to go back there. Um, but of not getting there, it's like it takes I, I wish, and I wish we could like share this advice and someone not go through it. But I also find that entrepreneurs are pretty like hard headed and have willpower and still do it
Tenacity.
their own way to learn the hard way. And then they're like, oh yeah, I need to eat vegetables and sleep more and do all the things. So we can say as much as we want on this podcast. I still feel like most of my listeners have obviously experienced this. But in that, I love that you mentioned meditation. I feel like we don't, that we're not still enough. There's a book too
Mm-mm.
that I love. It's by Cal Newport called Deep Work. By the way, say the,
Mm.
what's the title of your book again? I've read this before, but so that everyone
The
listening.
Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
Yes, Untethered Soul. We'll put that in the show notes. Yeah, so I think feeding our minds with just great inspiration and good solid advice. And one of the books that I actually require my team to read this is called Deep Work by Cal Newport, because it talks about, the energy side of what we were talking about, of we can get a lot done in 4 hours. A lot more actually than a whole full day if we are not distracted, really focused in on our time, things like that. Because we live in such a distracted, space that I think then too leads entrepreneurs on different rabbit trails and
Mhm.
then ultimately leads to anxiety, because at the end of the day, we're exerting so much more energy into spaces that we don't need to be exerting our energy into.
Absolutely. I completely agree. There is, I talk a lot with my founders about energy and, how to chunk their day up, how they want to go about the work that they need to do when they're going to be most effective. And usually it's psychology that gets in the way, their own personal psychology. I always mention like Simone Biles, and I always
Mm.
say, you can give entrepreneurs like, hey, here's how to read your P&L and L and your balance sheet, and how to understand your gross product margins and all that, how to pitch to investors. And yet, if you're not getting the adequate sleep, one, it means that serotonin levels are going to be lower. You're more likely you're not going to have that sense of calm, and your brain's gonna it's going to increase maybe your anxiety, and you're going to be less effective. And
Mhm.
and until folks experience that they can simultaneously um, do the meaningful work that they're doing and doing it in a way where they're feeling centered and calm, you have to get them to that point where they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it could be this way. Like
Yeah.
it just, I mean, I tell people I can't say that you're never going to feel anxiety, because some anxiety is, it's you've got a paper due and you're like, okay, I'm going to decide not to go out with my friends and get my paper done because I'm going to feel anxious if I don't do it because I won't get a good grade.
Yeah.
So it serves its purpose, but when it's running amok all the time, those patterns get hardwired, and then we start to get anxious over things that are inconsequential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. When was I'm there's a very specific year for me where I finally said, okay, I'm going to focus on myself. This was in 2022. I had a really hard year in 2021. And then it took me being in business for like a decade to finally be like, okay, let's like start caring for myself a little bit. Do you have a moment in time where it was like you started to take steps to doing that? Was it like overnight, or was it kind of progressive work where then, because I asked that because I find in that year where I was like, okay, I'm going to spend more time being creative. That's when I picked up pottery, and I love being on the wheel.
Uh,
I'm going to spend more time in nature. I'm going to do all these things. And I found that after that year, my whole life, these like things that I felt were disjointed, all of a sudden really just all became in flow, and things
yeah.
became ease and less, and I paid attention to when things felt like a lot of effort. Well, should it feel like this much effort? And started asking different questions to myself as an entrepreneur and as a leader for our company. But curious if you had, like, if there's a part of your journey where the intentionality of caring for yourself, um, yeah, became more forefront.
Yes, when you said that, I immediately went to '08. I don't even know if you were born,
I was
but
bored. Oh my gosh, how old do you think I am?
it it was, well,
You're
you look really
hilarious.
young. It was a really tough time, and financially, and it just felt like the sky was falling. And
Mm,
it was a moment where I started to tell myself that I don't want to have this feeling again. I, I need to do deeper work. And I'd done a lot of therapy when I was younger. Um, However, that led to good mental health strategies, but I wasn't always putting those in practice. I was kind of using them, break in case of emergency. And at that point, that's really what started me to start off my day every day with meditation, affirmations. Sometimes I stretch, and sometimes I'll do pranayama, like some deep breathing.
mm,
And it just, I mean, having it for myself, it's something that I just really hold sacred. And I don't feel in alignment without it.
mm.
So, yes, I do remember that moment. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I feel like those, one, if you can identify that moment, but two, like if anyone listening who potentially just feels in it, I think my advice, and then I would love, yeah, you to add on to this, is to find a healthy rhythm that it's like becomes, yeah, just part of your everyday, that is grounding and centering. And it looks different for everyone, right? We're speaking in very broad terms, but at the end of the day, I like how you started this podcast of like, it's very basic. It's really simple. Let's eat, let's sleep, let's wake up, and just breathe. But yeah, I think that's, anyone listening, just seek out what that rhythm is for you. And if it doesn't, you know, work, then, try to find something that does really ground you and center you.
I do. I agree with you. I think that somehow we've made having good mental health inaccessible to some
Mm,
people, and that the only way you can have it is by going to see a professional for 10 years, and maybe you'll get there. And yet there are these few things that one can just do, and that keep us in rhythm and flow. I always tell people just to start off incrementally. Like my clients will say, I don't see myself as like a super disciplined person. But then if you ask my husband, he's going to say that I really am. So I think I'm led by not doing the thing. I'm led more about the feeling that the thing gives me.
Mm,
And so for me, meditation, breathing, affirmations, like, and I've had like a super busy day and I've done all those things today. Plus I've been outside walking
mhm,
and I've been to a 3-hour meeting and I've already seen 2 clients. So at my point, and I have clients after you, and I still managed to run my business. But then
mhm.
I went to bed at a decent time, like 9:30, and I was up. I set my alarm for normally 5:45, but for some reason today I was tired, so I slept in
Me
till like
too. I'm normally
6:15.
like a 5 a.m.er, and I slept in today. I was like, my body needs it, and I'm not going to feel
Yeah,
guilty about it.
yeah, that I did the exact same thing. Yeah, and so giving your body what it needs is the easiest thing you can do. And yet, for entrepreneurs, time is the most important resource that they have,
Mm,
and it's finite. And so, what the only way to manage it is to go to sleep earlier and to get up earlier and to do it when the world is not making demands. And that's the thing that's where kind of the discipline comes in,
mhm,
where if you want different, you have to be different, you have to do differently. And it making incremental changes, deciding that all of next week I'm going to get up. I normally get up at 6. I'm going to get up at 5:55 all week long. And then the next week deciding, okay, how about I get up at, 5:45? And right there, you've already got 15 minutes for meditation.
mhm,
And just do it over incrementally so that the body habituates, the mind starts to incorporate that this is what I'm supposed to do. And you'll be surprised at how good you feel from just doing those things, but just kind of like trying to shove it in sometimes doesn't work as much as gradually cultivating something and then feeling the feelings of doing that. Wow,
mhm,
this feels really good. I feel really good about myself about waking up early. I feel great that I've been able to do 5 minutes of affirmations and 10 minutes of a meditation. This feels great. And allowing that to kind of sink in and then get some of that procedural memory where we're just getting up. We're not having to even
mhm.
program. So it can be easily done, but the first push, it does require some determination,
Yeah.
some discipline.
Determination,
Yeah.
discipline. Also
All
just
that
like,
entrepreneurs have.
yeah.
They have it.
Yeah, exactly. Commitment too, I think, and consistency. Like it's not gonna like it needs to be consistent effort. So I do like that you mentioned that. And mornings are magical if, I like how you mentioned where there's no demands of the world because I'm a mother of 3, so it's my quiet.
Me too.
Yeah, look at that. And I didn't realize how sacred mornings were until it's just like when you can finally have them back again and just like, but it took me a while. Living overseas, I became like this night owl because my team is waking up and that's like my evening and my priorities got really like just messed up and it's just been in the last year that I'm like, no, I'm going to prioritize my mornings. I'm going to shut down my evenings. My team knows that they only have a very small frame of time to get a hold of me, like my stateside team. But just figuring out what works, what works well and being committed like to those, boundaries and whatnot. I do have a question for you because I'm curious. Um, where I live in Kenya, mental health is not really spoken of. My COO, he's amazing. He's the first like Kenyan man that he's been working on my team for almost 4 years. And he is just so adamant about, and he's very open in talking about mental health. And I just love it because it's just something I just never experienced in that country, in that scope. But I'm curious what you think of America because it shouldn't be something taboo. It should be something very normal we talk about. But where you feel we
Right.
are as a nation, of people understanding the importance and that it should be normalcy. Like this should be something that's an everyday thing versus this like weird topic, especially in entrepreneurship. I find it's just like it's taken many years, I feel like, to get to this being a great, amazing topic to mention and to talk through. But where do you think we are as a nation as a whole in that, or the stigmas around that?
Um, I think we're much further along than we were, say, even 10 or 20
Mm-hmm.
years ago. I think the stigma, especially among Black and Brown people, that
Mm-hmm.
it still holds.
Mm-hmm.
It's and for Black folks, it's like we can pray it away. Like we can do these things, and because the church, whatever church you belong to, within sort of, and I'm saying Black culture because I know African as well as
Mm-hmm.
African American culture, that whatever that is, if it's church, mosque, it just feels like the community is your mental health. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can go to someone, you can go, to your imam, or you can go to someone who can help you. And I think people are starting to say, no, I see the difference. I need something that is not connected to my religious affiliation. They want it to be congruent,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not like they want it to have it be so outside of who they are. Um, However, they're starting to realize that it really is important, and that's been a missing piece, I think, in the religious component. And so we're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
I subtly tease my Black clients like, oh, I went on a hike. I'm like, ooh, Black people going on a hike. This is good. Being in nature.
I
And I
love it.
imagine in Africa, it's not such a big deal, but predominantly African Americans live in big cities.
It's true. It's true.
And so we've lost our connection to nature. So is it abysmal? No, it is getting better. There is some there is some data to suggest that quite a number of people are worried about employers. So, obviously in the United States, if we see a mental health professional, it's typically, our insurance is through our employer. I mean, it's the weirdest thing ever, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the way it's done. And 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 so people are worried about that becoming um there's some sort of backlash to that. And what if
Mm-hmm.
somebody finds out? And so I do think that that sometimes keeps people from going, as well as people of color have had enough terrible experiences where the person they were
Yeah.
working with weren't culturally competent.
Yeah.
So I I think that the stigma where I see it the most are in Black and Brown people, and I think that women as a group, regardless of ethnicity, seem to be the most open
Mm.
to therapy.
Yeah. That would make sense. Yeah, I could go on a whole we could be talking here for hours, and just, yeah, I'm just loving our conversation. Maybe I'll have you on again, Chantel. Another podcast, another
I
interview.
would love that, Jenny.
Well, first, as we end, first and foremost, I would love to, for people to know where they can find you, especially they want to get connected or just learn more about who you are. So if you could share that. And then as always, we end our podcast here with one last thing to live by. So if you have a sweet little inspiration for our community, I would love to hear what's one last thing to live by.
One last thing to live by, and again, I'm all about simplicity, is to connect. Talk with your neighbor, have a dinner with your spouse or children without the television on, call your best friend up and ask how her day is,
Mm.
that we are seeing epidemic proportions of loneliness and depression, which can lead to Alzheimer's. There's all sorts of bad things associated. It's kind of like the new smoking, right? How
Yeah.
sitting was the new smoking. Now it's loneliness. And there was a great longitudinal study that came out of Harvard. And please forgive me, but it's the longest study on happiness. It was done with originally just white males from Harvard. Eventually, they started to add women. What they found around the happiest people was really they were connected. They
Mm.
they were connected to people who loved them and they loved them back.
Mm.
And that's where all the magic happens. When the people are connected, we see less rates of depression. We see people feeling happier. We see people who say, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I've got purpose." People who are lonely, you'll notice they're people who are watching television all day long. They're not connected to people and ideas and things outside of themselves. So I would say first connect to people and then to a purpose, something that you believe in. But really, if you just connect to people and you feel love and you love other people back, you'll be batting 1,000.
So good. All right. Tell people where they can find you.
You can go to my website, which is Chantel at chantelcohen.com. And my name sounds like it begins with an S, but it's French. And so that's CHANTEL at chantelcohen.com. So Chantel at chantelcohen.com. You can find me there, or you can go to LinkedIn and you can just look at Chantel Cohen and you can find me there.
So good. We'll have all the information in the show notes and about the books we mentioned, all the things. It was an honor to have you on the podcast. Thank you
Oh,
so
thank you so
much for
much.
spending your time here and just being a part of this community. It really does mean a lot. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. And for all of you guys listening, as always, Oxy on.